Thank you.
Thank you, Ceann Comhairle. Today we are announcing this government's 5th budget. I'm pleased to report that due to our strong recovery and stable public finances, it's the 2nd budget in succession in which we are able to increase support for our public services. The days of spending cuts are behind us. In April, in the Spring Economic Statement, I said that there may be up to €750 million available next year for additional public expenditure measures. I'm happy, Ceann Comhairle, to say today that we're in a position to actually allocate that money. It is worth remembering the distance we have travelled since 2011. When the government was elected, the budget deficit stood at 12.5% of GDP. This year, as the Minister of Finance has indicated, it will be 2.1%. In 2010, the year of the infamous promissory note, the headline deficit rate stood at 30% of GDP, a staggering deficit. Next year, notwithstanding the increases announced today...
Would you please stay quiet? Thank you. Sorry, would you ever stay quiet? Listen, there's a long tradition in this House that when ministers stand at budget time to make their statement, we pay the courtesy of listening to them. And I would just stay quiet and cut out the comedian stuff. Thank you.
Next year, notwithstanding the increases that I'm announcing today, the forecast deficit will be 1.2% of GDP, one of the lowest in Europe. Only a few years ago, some commentators questioned the sustainability of our debt. As Minister Noonan has just stated, from a peak of over 120% of GDP, next year the GDP ratio is forecast to be 93%, below the European average. We've made tremendous progress in bringing our national debt down towards European norms. Unemployment, which peaked at over 15%, is now 9.4%, and we've created 130,000 jobs since 2012. We have the highest level of economic growth in the OECD. Our economy is now larger than it was at the pre-crisis peak. By any standards, we've witnessed in the last 4.5 years a remarkable turnaround, a tribute to the resilience of the Irish people. I want to deal with one issue that generates considerable debate. It's become popular among some to say that this government under this government that inequality has risen. That's simply not true. Our adjustment has been a difficult one. Let's hear the facts. There are some economic illiterates, but listen to the facts. Our adjustment has been a difficult one, but it has been a fair one. Those with the most have given most. Income inequality after taxes and social transfers has reduced during the period of the crisis in Ireland. The progressivity of our income tax system means that we have one of the most effective tax systems in the OECD at reducing inequality. To ignore this fact and to point to income inequality before tax transfers is to ignore the central role of any government to protect the most vulnerable of our citizens. But the best weapon against inequality is not social welfare. It's decent jobs and fair wages. A fair society is one where those who work hard receive decent rewards. One of the first acts of this government was to reverse the unnecessary and cruel cut of €1 per hour in the minimum wage introduced by our predecessors, a cut of over 11%. In July of this year, the Low Pay Commission recommended that the minimum wage be increased further by 50 cents to over €9 per hour. The Commission recognised that a recovery based on low wages was no recovery at all. Today, Ceann Comhairle, I'm pleased to confirm that the Government will implement the Commission's proposal. And from the 1st of January next, the new statutory minimum wage will rise from €8.65 to €9.15 per hour. This means that under this government, the minimum wage has been increased by 20%. This government is committed to making work pay. During the first 3 years of this government, despite necessary reductions in public expenditures, resources were targeted where they were most needed. We protected core social welfare benefits. I'm especially proud that we maintained the state pension. Since the beginning of 2012, we've invested more than €1.25 billion in school buildings. We've built 102 new schools and completed 71 large-scale extensions. We did more in the worst of times than our predecessor did in the best of times. Despite huge pressure, we sought to protect the young, the old and the vulnerable. But we are conscious of the need to continue to face the challenges that Irish families have to meet. Our aim is to ensure that the recovery is felt in every home and in every community across the land. Later, I will outline the measures contained in this budget which will help us to achieve that objective. But first, I want to repeat the context in which all budgetary decisions have now to be made. The fiscal rules ratified through referendum by our people in 2012 ensure that public expenditure cannot rise above the potential growth of our economy. Our commitments under the Stability and Growth Pact are real. In 2015, economic growth and greater than expected tax receipts have allowed the government to improve services in a number of key areas. While remaining firmly within the fiscal parameters, we've had an opportunity to plan for the long term by targeting areas with demographic and demand pressures. The extra funding allocated this year will ensure that enough resources are available to all government departments to provide quality services next year. The measures give us a platform from which we can build. They mean that resources will be directed at areas of the greatest need and are consistent with long-term sustainable planning and development. At the National Economic Dialogue in July, we listened to employers, to trade unions, to community organisations and many more. Our engagement with these groups helped to ensure that additional funding will be targeted at areas which have the greatest impact. The spending measures contained in Budget 2016 are consistent with that approach. The Lansdowne Road Agreement typifies our commitment to responsible expenditure management. Legally, pay reductions in the public sector were predicated on there being a financial emergency. Thankfully, those emergency days are receding behind us. Therefore, an orderly unwinding of the financial emergency legislation which reduced pay is prudent and indeed is the correct thing to do. Moreover, as economic growth returns and private sector wages increases, it's only right that our nurses, our guards, our teachers and our public servants generally would see an improvement in their take-home pay. During the crisis, their sacrifices allowed us to sustain quality public services. Efficient public services are essential to a modern society. When we came into office, reform of the public service was a key component of our strategy to meet the enormous challenges that we faced. I'm proud of the considerable reforms that we've delivered since 2011. I want to commend public servants for their effort and their commitment in that regard. I believe that the implementation of our Civil Service Renewal Plan and the wider programme of public service reform will continue to be a key driver of Ireland's recovery. Unwinding the financial emergency legislation can only be done in a way that does not jeopardise our public finances. We learned the hard way that sustainability is the key to progress. Pay levels, like the public finances themselves, need to be managed in a responsible, sustainable way with the long-term interests of all our people at their core. The expenditure allocations outlined today reflect this approach. In 2016, gross current expenditure will be over €51.4 billion. Capital expenditure will be an additional €3.7 billion. The departmental ceilings published in the documentation before the House include funding for the first-year expenditure on projects announced as part of the 6-year capital programme we published in recent weeks. That €27 billion exchequer investment will allow for large-scale investment in education, health, transport and all other sectors. Under current expenditure, allocations will target critical needs in childcare, in education, in social protection, in employment, in health and in housing. Multi-annual ceilings allow departments to plan ahead. They take account of new measures and provide for population growth across our country. In line with economic growth and within the parameters of the fiscal rules, planned public expenditure will rise again moderately in 2017 and 2018. Childcare is a key priority for government. At the National Economic Dialogue in July, and indeed in a range of reports published in this area, there was broad agreement on the need to focus on the issue of affordability and quality in relation to childcare. Investment in childcare has both social and economic returns. It acts as a key labour activation measure, particularly for women, allowing those who wish to work to take up the opportunity of work. And it improves educational and social outcomes by providing our children with the best possible start. I'm therefore increasing the current expenditure allocation to the Department of Children and Youth Affairs to over €1.1 billion. I'm happy to say that this increased allocation allows me to bring forward a package of measures to ease the burden on working families. We're extending the amount of time parents can avail of the very successful Early Childhood Care and Education scheme. From now on, children will be eligible for free childcare from the age of 3 up to and until they reach the age of 5.5 or until they start primary school. I'm particularly pleased to be able to announce over 15 million more money to fund the initiative to facilitate the full participation of children with disabilities into this scheme. We're also introducing a range of quality measures for early education, including audits, inspections, training and restoring capitation levels in this sector. To support parents in low-paid employment, we're going further. We are creating 8,000 places through the Community Childcare Subvention Programme. And to help after-school care, we're providing €3 million to develop school services in existing school buildings. Last year, I said if circumstances allowed, we would increase child benefit by €5. I'm happy to say that our success in reducing unemployment has allowed me to do this. And in 2016, child benefit will be €140 per month for every child. Finally, to recognise the need of modern families and the role of fathers in the household, I'm happy to announce that we will legislate for statutory paternity leave of 2 weeks. This change will take effect from next September. The improvement in our public finances has given us the opportunity to assist hard-working parents. The package announced today will be a particular help to working mothers, and by increasing participation in the labour force, these measures will also be a key contributor to economic growth. I'm allocating €8.5 billion to education for current expenditure next year. Education depends on educators. Teachers have the capacity to transform a child's life. The quality of our teachers is consistently recognised in OECD comparisons. Education is also the engine of economic growth. Our teachers have a big responsibility. They teach the citizens of tomorrow. We have an excellent cadre of highly qualified young people coming into the teaching profession, and I'm pleased that the job openings that they feared would not be there are now materialising. I can confirm that the allocation for 2016 will provide for over 2,260 new additional teaching posts, including 600 new resource teachers, and in addition to the extra 610 special needs assistants and 190 resource teachers that we already announced for next year. We will also reduce the pupil-teacher ratio. At primary level, we're reducing it from 28 to 1 to 27 to 1, and at secondary level it will fall from 19 to 1 to 18.7 to 1. Over the last 5 years, we have supported education. As our public finances improve, we will continue to invest in and develop this important sector. I am allocating €19.6 billion to the Department of Social Protection next year. Within this allocation, I am particularly anxious to protect and support our older citizens. We will therefore increase all pension payments by €3 per week from the start of next year. This is the first increase since 2009. To help the thousands of men, I'd remind Matty that the only actual cut in pensions was voted by him under Fianna Fáil. To help the thousands of men and women who take care of their loved ones with dignity and compassion throughout our country, I am restoring the value of the Respite Care grant to €1,700. I am pleased to announce too that we are increasing the fuel allowance by €2.50 per week to €22.50. This increase will benefit people dependent on long-term social welfare payments and those unable to provide for their own heating. A shared prosperity is one where every person, regardless of income, feels the benefit of our now new recovery. So to complement the changes in the universal social charge that the Minister for Finance has announced that help the low-paid, we're increasing the threshold of family income supplement by €5 per week for families with one child and €10 per week for families with 2 or more children. Together with the rise in the minimum wage, this budget confirms our commitment to helping the low-paid. We want to make work pay. Finally, our strong record of reducing unemployment and restoring the public finances means that this year we can increase the Christmas bonus for all social welfare recipients to 75%, a threefold increase on last year's payment. The Taoiseach will announce further details of the full social welfare package later today. The best form of social protection is a job. The reduction in unemployment from peak of 15.2% to 9.4% now has been, in my view, this government's biggest single achievement. But this is still too high. Budget 2016 will support greater and more accelerated job creation. Total funding for the Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation will be €792 million. 385,000 Irish jobs, around 1 in 5, are in businesses supported by our enterprise agencies. Under the capital plan, a further €500 million will be provided next year to support these agencies. Many of the businesses they support are at the forefront of research and innovation. They create well-paid jobs and enhance opportunities for young graduates and the unemployed. A key focus of activity next year is to ensure that the benefits of economic recovery, particularly in terms of employment, reaches all parts of our country. In this regard, a specific IDA regional property programme will support the regional action plans on jobs launched by my colleague the Minister for Jobs during the last number of months. I'm providing, obviously the Deputy wasn't focused on what is actually happening in the real world.
Chair, please.
I'm providing €13.2 billion for delivery of health services next year. I'm happy to say that this quantum of money restores the resources of our health services to its pre-crisis level. This year, free GP care for the under 6s and over 70s were put in place, one of the most innovative things happening on the health service of recent years. This represented the first step in the phased introduction of a universal GP service and is already benefiting 300,000 senior citizens and children in our country. Linked to this was the introduction of cycles of care in relation to type 2 diabetes and asthma. Next year, Subject to successful negotiations with the doctors' representatives, it is planned to extend GP care without fees to all children under 12. This marks the next phase in the implementation of universal GP care. Funding has also been made available next year to provide therapeutic services for children, particularly for speech and language therapy. Over 2 million children are now covered by a medical card or a GP card. That's 25% more than in 2010 and substantially improves people's access to primary care services. In our hospitals, 880,000 day cases will be carried out by the end of this year, an increase of 20% over the last 5 years. This year, for the first time, government placed the Fair Deal nursing home scheme on a fully funded, demand-led basis. This will continue next year with government funding of €940 million for the Fair Deal alone. Everyone who needs Fair Deal funding will have approval within 4 weeks. We've also protected frontline staff. Since the beginning of last year, I think this is something that will come as a surprise to some deputies in the House, hospital staffing numbers has increased by 3,000. We've hired, since the beginning of last year, 1,000 additional nurses. As our recovery continues, we will continue to support and expand our health services. One of the worst legacies of the economic crisis is our dysfunctional housing market. Years of underinvestment in social housing has led to an accommodation crisis, particularly in our main urban areas. Last year, this government announced a €2.2 billion package to begin to deal with that legacy. The package was a multi-annual investment aimed at addressing over a decade of neglect. Under our social housing strategy, over €500 million is available this year to build or to acquire new homes. I am also increasing the current allocation for social housing by a further €69 million to €414 million. This funding will enable local authorities to secure accommodation for a further 14,000 households. I'm keen to make use of all available funding to address immediate housing needs. So, pending further developments on the special purpose vehicle that we announced, I'm making €10 million available from the proceeds of the sale of Bord Gas Éireann for an affordable housing pilot scheme. This will be an ongoing annual commitment to secure long-term increases in the housing supply. The human cost of the legacy of boom and bust housing development is the number of people without a home. Addressing homelessness, particularly among families, is a key government priority. Under the capital plan announced recently, funding is available to provide 500 modular housing units for homeless families as an emergency measure. I'm also increasing the current allocation for emergency accommodation for homeless people by an additional €17 million. The increase will bring Exchequer supports to €70 million, up 56% since 2014, and will help homeless families transition to long-term sustainable housing. 2016 will be an historic year for our country. It is right that we mark the centenary of 1916 with commemorative events that everybody in the nation can be proud of. The Rising was the event that propelled our nation on the path to independent statehood. We need to mark it with respect, to be aware of its complexities, and to appreciate its idealism. We are the beneficiaries of that legacy. In recognition of this, €50 million has been provided for an extensive range of events and initiatives under our commemorative programme that we've launched. It will also allow the development of the GPO Interpretive Centre, the National Monument on Moore Street, Teachon Firsig in Rosmuck, and the Athenaeum in Enniscorthy. The allocation for the Department of the Arts, Heritage, the Gaeltacht will also provide an additional €3 million for a new scheme of once-off grants to arts and cultural centres around the country. I'd like Ceann Comhairle to briefly mention other measures. I'm providing €2.2 billion to the Department of Justice for current expenditure. Last year, the Minister for Justice announced that the Garda Training College in Templemore would reopen and remain open. I'm happy to announce that in 2016, funding has been made available to recruit and train an additional 600 Gardaí. Resources have also been made available to improve Garda ICT and for the new policing authority. The Government is committed to supporting An Garda Síochána. The human tragedy in Carrickmines and in Omeath over the weekend are a stark reminder of the fragility of life. In the aftermath of such terrible events, the moral support of the community and the professional help of An Garda Síochána, the fire crews, the medical staff and the social workers marks out definitively what we are as a society and as a people. In the same way, we need to care for and protect our own people in these dreadful times. We must also be prepared to do the same for others. The refugee crisis on Europe's borders demands a practical and a generous response from the Irish people, who have a long and proud history of international humanitarianism. The spontaneous and heartfelt response of communities across the country, which is evident in the huge number of efforts of assistance and volunteerism, shows that the Irish people will not be found wanting. €25 million will be provided to ensure that Ireland is not found wanting in this regard. Funds will be spent on accommodation, additional staffing, integration programmes and on a new emergency resettlement and orientation centre. €903 million has been allocated to the Department of Defence. Ireland's participation in humanitarian operations in the Mediterranean and ongoing peacekeeping missions in the Middle East and elsewhere is a testament to the professionalism and the dedication of our armed forces. Everybody in this nation is proud of them. The recently published White Paper on Defence provides a framework for a modern, adaptable force that can carry out operations both at home and abroad. For services at home, I'm happy to announce that €2 million has been made available to put an emergency aeromedical service on a permanent footing. This service will save lives and give comfort, particularly to rural communities. Even in the most difficult of times, this government maintained our commitment to fighting global poverty and hunger. As the public finances improve, we'll strengthen that commitment. Today I'm allocating over €640 million to official development assistance. €486 million will be managed by the Department of Foreign Affairs through Irish Aid, with the remainder being administered through other government departments and the EU Development Cooperation budget. Irish funding will make a significant contribution to the international aid efforts in suffering countries such as Syria, Iraq, Ethiopia and Somalia. The programme will also continue to help people in our key partner countries in some of the worst and poorest parts of the world. I'm allocating €1.3 billion to the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. Additional funding has been allocated in particular to a new agri-environment scheme and to capital investment schemes under the Rural Development Programme. This year's allocation will also fund a range of new schemes under the Seafood Development Programme set out by the Minister. The programme will drive investment in fisheries and seafood development from now on to 2020. Further details of the estimates are set out in the estimates reports account caller that I've circulated. Budget 2016 is about the future. It's about using our resources to support communities in every part of our country. It's about creating jobs so that people can look forward to a better life. It's about using the results of our hard-earned stability to improve our lives, better our communities, and to plan ahead with confidence. I said last year that the budget marked a turning point, the end of an era of austerity budgets. At the election in 2011, this government made two key promises. We promised we would fix It is wry indeed to hear Fianna Fáil talk about broken. We promised, Count Corner.
All right, okay. You've had your fun. Minister, please proceed.
Fianna Fáil, Count Corner, and Matty, the ones who took the lifeboat before the ship sunk. We promised we would fix the public finances. We promised, Count Corla, that we would fix the public finances and that we would restore growth to our economy. We have made good on those promises. We promised, too, that we would never allow the state to fall into similar peril. The spending increases announced today are moderate, sensible and commensurate with our economic requirements. We continue to make good progress. Our debt is falling, our deficit is narrowing, unemployment is coming down. The previous government's budgetary failure helped lead us into the crisis. Between the year 2000 and 2008, gross spending increased by 139%. In the run-up,
Listen, would you hold on, please? Just stay quiet. It's nearly finished. Thank you.
In the run-up to the 2007 election, between 2005 and 2007, public spending was ramped up by 25%, over 11 billion euros in nominal terms. Now, that's election bribery for you, Deputy Martin. By comparison, next year public expenditure will be just 4% ahead of 2014. 4% increase in expenditure at a time when tax revenues are forecast to increase by 14% and our GDP is forecast to rise by 18%. Through prudent and careful management of the state finances, this government has brought the country back from the brink. Our recovery, though not yet complete, is not only a justification of the policies we pursued for the last 4.5 years, but a condemnation of the easy alternatives proffered by some. Who speaks of Syriza now? While maintaining the responsible approach.
Would you stay quiet, please? Thank you.
Count Corla, while maintaining the responsible approach that got our country to where we are today, we're committed to investing in public services, assisting those most in need, creating jobs, providing a platform for future growth, ensuring that every family and every community in every part of the country can share in a better future. Today, we reap the benefits of the hard work and resilience of the Irish people as we set our course for a better Ireland.